Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. I hope that Virgo season has felt exciting, restful, creative, basically everything that you're hoping it to be. And if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, I also hope that you're enjoying this slow transition into fall. So, before I get into this very special conversation that I have for you today, just a reminder that my course with Britton LaRue, Astrology as Praxis, will begin on September 10th. If you've been following our conversation within this podcast, Astrology as Praxis is a year-long journey. It's a deep dive not just into the language and the intellectual studies of astrology, but also into what it means to approach astrology with your whole being, with your hearts, with your bodies, with your spirits. It's really a course that Britton and I designed to help you truly build your own astrological language and the way that you can interact with astrology that's truly unique to you. From my experience, both learning astrology as well as teaching astrology, what I found is that those who are drawn to study astrology are drawn because they feel themselves called by this language, called by the planets, called by the signs, right? There's just this deep resonance that you feel when you engage with astrology. However, I also know from firsthand experience, from observing students, that often it can be really challenging to translate this deep soul-level calling into like an embodied sense of really owning this language, of really speaking and channeling the planetary wisdom through your own lived experience and who you are as a unique individual to other people. If you've never studied astrology and you're excited to explore how you can maybe build your own unique relationship with astrology, with the planets, then this course is definitely for you. If you've been studying astrology for some time and you kind of still find yourself overwhelmed by astrology to the point of maybe not feeling like you can share astrology, whether that be with friends or with people that you want to read for, then this course is definitely for you. And if you've been studying astrology and maybe you've kind of had this period of falling in love, but then also out of love with astrology, and you're feeling called to maybe rekindle that love, then this course is also for you. So if this sounds exciting to you, feel free to check out our course page in the show notes linked below. And if you feel called to join us before we begin, which is on September 10th, we would love to have you. And also, if you're totally resonating with the course, you know you have the energetic capacity to engage, but perhaps you have some financial concerns that are holding you back, please reach out to me because we would love to work something out with you. Okay, so let me introduce you to my guest today. If you've been circling around in communities of magical humans who deeply contemplate life, death, everything in between, then I believe you are no stranger to my guest in conversation today. It's none other than Amanda Yates Garcia. Amanda wrote the book Initiated, Memoir of a Witch, as well as being the host of a beloved podcast centered around the tarot, Between the Worlds. To me, Amanda's book, Initiated, is probably one of, if not the best books I've ever read. It is so engaging, it's so well written, it's so profound, and I also read it, or rather listened to the audiobook version, which Amanda narrated during a particularly challenging period of my life, and it really gave me so much strength to kind of move through that period of my life. So definitely recommend that you check out Initiated. If you haven't, all the links will be in the show notes below. When I first met Amanda, she just kind of struck me immediately as someone who's not afraid to make space for her own human struggles. And my sense is that it's not in contrast to, but rather a part and parcel of her magic and her practices. We had this really instant magical connection, and I just knew right away that it would be such a treat to have a conversation with Amanda for the podcast. So I'm super excited that we were able to record this conversation, and I believe you are in for a treat. So let me introduce you to Amanda through her bio. Amanda Yates Garcia is a writer, witch, and the Oracle of Los Angeles. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, the LA Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, the London Times, CNN, Bravo, as well as a viral appearance on Fox. She has led rituals, classes, and workshops on magic and witchcraft at the UCLA, UC Irvine, MoCA Los Angeles, CalArts, the Hammer Museum, LACMA, the Getty, Human Resources, MoCA Tucson, and many other venues. Amanda hosts monthly moon rituals online and the Between the Worlds podcast, which looks at the Western mystery tradition through a mythopoetic lens. Her book, Initiated Memoir of a Witch, received a starred review from Publishers Weekly and Kirkus and has been translated into 6 languages. In this conversation, we not only went into the deep ends, we went there straight away. You'll see how we just dove right in. To me, that's kind of a marker of an exciting conversation because we just went places that we didn't know we were going to go. And we spoke about Amanda's writing process, how her life shifted after the publication of Initiated, as well as her current writing project. We also share a prominent astrological signature in our birth charts, which is that both of us have our suns in the 7th house of one-on-one relationships. It's also a house that rules partnerships as well as enemies, actually. And I think it really shows. Amanda certainly held space for me too throughout various moments of this conversation. We discuss capitalism and depression, Amanda's personal underworld journey, as well as the collective underworld, choosing our own path, asking for planetary energies and guides to help us leave a situation that felt sticky. We also discussed what Amanda's practice as a witch means to her, as well as how re-enchanting our relationship to the world can really assist us in reconnecting to the earth as well as the earth's body. To me, the depth of Amanda's contemplation is so inspiring, and I'm so excited and I'm so honored to share this conversation with you. Here is my conversation with Amanda Yates Garcia. Hello, Amanda. Welcome to the podcast.
Jonathan, I'm so happy to be here with you. I've been looking forward to this for so long.
I know, me too. Thank you so much for saying yes to this. And honestly, so a little bit about my process is I tend to read the work of whoever I will be talking to. And it honestly has been such a joy mind melding with your work. So
Thank you so much. That's so wonderful. I mean, that's amazing that you do such comprehensive background work. I know that that's, a lot of commitment. So thank you so much for doing that. I'm sure it makes for I know that it does make for really great interviews. So,
well, I am just so honored that you're here. And before we start, I kind of want to share a little bit of an anecdote about your book, Initiated, because I actually read it right before lockdown when I was in Japan. And it accompanied me through a very powerful moment in my life. And I think that was really before I started becoming really serious about my my mystical journey. And so you were such a huge part of that. And I just want to thank you in person.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It always means so much to me to hear that, writing is really hard. So making art is really hard. Writing in particular, I think, is really, really hard. And it takes so long to make something. And I feel like there's a lot of abyss crossing, in Crowley's idea that, to become your full self, you have to leap across the abyss. And in writing, wow, you really do. You have to confront so much self-doubt and just kind of pushing big boulders up hills. So it always, means so much to me to know that my work has reached people and that, it's like a way of making connections between folks and throughout space and time. It's just so magical and beautiful. I'm so grateful to know that. How did that process go for you? You made it through?
I made it through. Obviously, I'm here. That was a very challenging time. And I think there was something you wrote in Initiated about Earth and Sky. I'm just going to read it.
Okay.
In our contemporary world, we build structures to take us as high into the sky as we can go. We want the penthouse apartment, we want to shout our dominion from the mountaintops, but we rarely go underground anymore. We go in subways sometimes, but they're brightly lit, packed with people, places where we wait impatiently to be taken from place to place while we read a book or listen to a podcast. We don't make it a regular practice any longer of being humbled inside the earth. And I think that part about being humbled inside the earth was really speaking to me, and I think speaks to that moment in my life of really learning what it means to be in the underbelly of my own experience. So,
well, in that passage, I was speaking kind of on multiple levels in the sense that, first of all, I was literally underground many times in that section where I was visiting all these caves in Crete, where the gods were born. And, we don't really spend much time in caves. That is for sure true right now. But the whole book is about, what it means to be in the underworld, and the underworld is a maze. It has many different layers of meaning, but one of the meanings that I was referring to is like mental health crisis. That's one way of thinking about it. And feelings of being lost, of having your agency taken away from you, of not being able to figure out how you're going to find your path again in life, or who you are, or that your goals, your dreams, your desires, your passions, that they feel elusive to you. Like it feels like you're kept away from them. You're in the dark. You're taken up by something that is stronger and more powerful than you. And so one of the things that I realized was that in going into these caves, which very much were the underworld and were so powerful and beautiful, and if you go in them deep enough, there's no light whatsoever. It's completely black. You do not have any sense of direction. There's just no way for you to know where's up and where's down. And I realized that being in that space was actually profoundly beautiful. That kind of surrender, that kind of not knowing, that kind of humbling, the erasure of our ego and the dissolution of the ego is really, really powerful. And I realized that our culture really wants to inflate the ego and give us this sense of individualism and triumph over everything that could possibly be triumphed over. Over everything in the universe is kind of where we're headed, where we want to head. And thinking specifically about depression or mental health problems as actually leading us to some kind of a truth in our culture that we're not allowed to experience, we're not allowed to see. And thinking about how, for instance, depression on its own is not really the problem. The problem is when we feel depressed, we can't participate in capitalism. It makes it much harder, right? To get out of bed, to work, to think there's a purpose in your working, to feel motivated to succeed, to feel motivated to push yourself, to strive. When you're experiencing depression or any kind of mental health issues, not only do you not want to do that, it becomes virtually impossible to do that. Yeah. It's just really hard to make yourself get up. And the thing is, I think it's because there's a deep inner knowing. There's a part of you that is that comes from the core of the earth, that comes from the chthonic, the ancestors, the ancestral realms, that's saying there's something not right here. There's something not in alignment here. And if we go inward and we let ourselves be still and we let ourselves go into the dark, then that dark will speak to us. Yeah. Like the spirit of the earth will speak to us. And when we get pulled into depressions, for instance, I think that the spirit of the earth is trying to speak to us, but we aren't allowed to have that time. So I think that the thing that really causes those mental health crises to be so life-shattering is that we are being called by a deep knowing and we're not allowed to listen to it, And so I think that in the practice of witchcraft, for me, offers a way of reclaiming our strength and our power so that we can listen. And I think that that's what a lot of people responded to when they read the book, because a lot of people have told me that they radically changed their lives after reading it, which is so beautiful to me, but that they broke up with people, or they left their parents' house, or they quit the job that they hated. And I think it's really the power of the chthonic, the power of witchcraft, the power of the depths and the dark that we in our craft understand, like, oh, I can become the queen of this realm, right? Like I can find my power here, like Persephone, who's kind of one of the main characters of the book, you might say.
Yeah. Yes. And I love this idea you're bringing in about inner resources, because I think what makes it so hard to have these moments of the underworld, especially on a psychological level, within capitalism, is that not only are you dealing with all the stuff that's coming from within, right? And perhaps the realization, looking at the system, that it's not supporting you, you're also getting the very real reminder of the fact that you're not functioning, right? Like your bills are still coming. You still have to pay your bills. You still have to pay your student loans, right? And all of that is scary. It just adds more burden on top of perhaps realizing that you need to be on a different path on a soul level.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's really what the book is about. Like a huge part of the first part of the book is about a kind of rupture, mental, emotional, physical, financial crisis that I had, in my early 20s. And the problem was exactly as you said. Like, I was having this crisis of reality, and simultaneously, like, capitalism insists that you keep dealing with it. So it's like, well, if you don't pay your rent, you will be out on the street. You will be homeless. Yes. You won't be able to eat. You will find yourself in debt. You will find yourself in grave, serious physical danger. If you get sick, like, you could die. Like, it's not a hypothetical. It's not symbolic. It's not, the underworld becomes literally life-threatening because of the ways that we experience it in capitalism, the relentlessness of capitalism. And so I feel like, I actually had written this as a response to some of your questions that I was planning on addressing later, but I feel like that's really what, for me, my main work is right now that I'm wrestling with, which is this idea of what we know to be true collectively, like, for instance, you hear a lot on Instagram, like, oh, healing is collective. And, you know, psychological healing from depression, for instance, is a collective project. And we hear a lot about collectivity, and we hear a lot about, you know, shifting our values away from capitalism, you know, but while those ideas are really beautiful, and I think most of us really want to devote ourselves to them, we also are like, okay, but do I have to wait until the collective can support me? Do I have to wait until we're a big shining community before I get the resources that I need, or that I climb out of this mental health crisis, or before I find my path? You know, do I have to wait until we live in this ideal world? Because as you said, the bills still keep coming. So even though we might think, oh, I really want to devote my work to the collective good, for instance. But also we know, like, if you don't save for retirement when you are old, like, you literally might not be able to afford to live anywhere, for instance. Like, you might starve on the street, because that's the reality of our world. And so my work is really about trying to navigate that in a really real and practical sense, how to live according to our integrity while simultaneously acknowledging the realities of the system in which we live.
Yeah. I love how we're just jumping into the deep end here. So I feel like we're going to have to kind of crawl. We're going to have to crawl our way back into some, you know, slightly lighter conversation. But you wrote something to the effect of having taken up jobs that are arts adjacent and not really loving it, and then deciding that you're just going to write and make your art and do witchcraft until the money runs out. And in that article you said, well, the money hasn't run out, so here I am still doing it.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting because, as you were saying, I was also thinking about this idea that when one is walking one's path, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's easy, but there is a way in which I think also the practice of witchcraft reminds us that we're always in connection with and in collaboration with the earth, right? And with the universe. And there is a way, and this is not, you know, spiritual bypassing, but there's a way in which if you do the true work, that you will be supported.
That is exactly it. And that is really the paradox at the center of, I think, the work that most of us are trying to do. And in that instance, I was talking about a ritual that I did when I was working in, some arts administration jobs, I think around 10 years ago. I think I kind of officially became the Oracle of Los Angeles 10 years ago. And up to that point, I was, I had this really miserable office job where I was just like sitting at a desk 9 hours a day doing this really awful work. And it was in this hideously ugly part of town. It was just, there was no windows in this office, and I would sit in traffic on my way there like an hour each way, and it was just like so relentlessly hellish. I was so desperately miserable there, and I really felt like I wasn't going to be able to continue to do that job and live. Like I was like, I cannot stay in this. I just felt like the minutes of my life ticking by, and it felt so pointless to me to be doing this. And so I did this ritual, and it was very simple. I was just like naked on my knees. I built an altar to the goddess, to Venus, who I work with a lot, and was just like, please help me. Please help me. I cannot live like this. Like, I will do whatever you want. Just please help me find my way out of this, because I cannot see the way. And it was so honest. Like, it was, they say a lot about magic that, you have to be doing it in alignment with your true will in order for it to work.
Yeah.
And that means that your will has to be clear, right? Like your desire has to be really clear. So if you're ambivalent about something, that often your magic doesn't work in the way that you want it to. But in that case, I was extremely clear. I was like, this is the truth. I cannot live like this. And then within a couple weeks, a relative that I did not expect to send me money, like sent me, I think, like essentially $5,000. And then I got laid off from this job. Oh, what a blessing. So I got to collect unemployment. And so I said to myself, okay, I am going to fully commit myself to being the witch that I have felt like I long to be, and to just commit myself to that in my practice until the money runs out. But I'm going to be completely 100% behind it. And when the money runs out, I'll get a job again. And then, here I am 10 years later or whatever. And the money hasn't run out and I'm doing well. But I do feel like that's a huge truth, is that, a lot of the time in our work, we can't really do the thing that we want to do unless we're committed to it 100%. But in order to commit to it 100%, we have to put like everything at risk. And it doesn't we don't know that it's going to work. Yeah. So it's really high risk. And I think that that's where the paradox is, that often if we do it, if we take that risk, then we are supported. But also, there are a bunch of economic, social factors, like race, class, level of, physical health, whether or not you have children, things like that make it so that, some people just have more support than others. For instance, like the fact that I had a relative who could send me $5,000.
Yeah.
The money could come through in that way. But I also, one of the things that I'm reluctant to say, like, I don't want to say, I want to honor my privilege, or not honor it, but acknowledge my privilege.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I think that if I worry that if I acknowledge it too much, then it might feel to people like only if you have privilege can you find your way out. And I just don't, I believe that there has to be a way. I don't know. Do you know what I'm saying?
I totally know what you're saying. And I think this is one of those maybe spaces that are very emergent in our conversation. So I want to name that. Yes, I often feel like sometimes when the conversation around privilege, because I think privilege comes in many different ways, right? And I think that I'm not saying that hardship doesn't exist, but I think on the other hand too, there is always opportunity to kind of work with something that you have. And it's all relative, right? Because you and I, as compared to Elon Musk, is not very privileged. And yet I think, so I wonder if, let's take a step back and try a slightly different angle, right?
Okay.
To that approach. Something that I talk a lot about in this podcast and also just in general is the idea of creativity. And to me, creativity is ultimately about remembering that we have access to the force of creation, right? So if we have the ability to tap into whatever animating force that is, and I'm looking at one of your quotes here about the anima mundi, right? If we remember that we can work with a force that animates life on this earth, then there's always potential for creation, no matter how small. And I think sometimes the conversation around privilege can end up becoming more disempowering, because it's almost like, oh, I got out of a particular situation because I had access to the ability to create that another person doesn't. That's not to say that oppression doesn't exist, right? That's not to say that certain people will have a harder go at things. But I think comparison also, something that I keep coming back to in my work with the Akashic Records is that comparison is just, it's pointless, right? Because everyone is here, everyone has their own curriculum.
Exactly. Last night, my stepfather was telling me that comparison is deadly, he says. And it really is. Like, it could really kill you. It could really kill your spirit to look at what other people are doing and what other people have. That's why Instagram, for instance, can be so soul destroying, is because it's designed to make us compare ourselves to other people. Mm-hmm. And exactly as you were saying, I mean, I think acknowledging privilege is important, because if someone is out there struggling, for instance, and they're thinking, why is this happening for this person and it's not happening for me? It could very well be due to privilege. For instance, like that people have access to all sorts of things, like if you don't have trauma in your family background, for instance, it's a huge privilege, because it sets you back so far. To have to work through all of your trauma before you kind of get just to level and then start your life or whatever. But on the other hand, if you say, oh, I got this because of my privilege, then it's implying, therefore, if you don't have this privilege, then you cannot have the thing that I have. Or like exactly as you were saying, like this access to creativity I have because of my privilege, and therefore people who don't have my privilege cannot access this creativity. So I think that is a really kind of violent and very disheartening idea. But I think the idea that there can be some comfort in helping us understand that, if we aren't able to, have the success that we view, quote unquote success that we see what other people are having, then it probably is down to privilege in a lot of cases.
Right. So Amanda, I wanna talk about the present moment, because I feel like you've kind of undergone this really incredible journey in the past 10 years or so as Oracle of LA. You wrote Initiated, and you appeared on Tucker Carlson, which we can talk about. But I want to ask you, what lights up for you if I pose this invitation of reflecting on who you feel, sense, or know yourself to be in the present moment?
Who do I feel, sense, or know myself to be in the present moment?
Yes.
I don't know who I am. I mean, I'm undergoing a really major Pluto transit right now. Mm-hmm. Pluto is conjunct my midheaven right now. And I have I wrote them down. I have so many Saturn squares happening right now. So I feel like I'm undergoing a really radical process of transformation right now, and I don't know what the truth is, but I think that can be a really generative place to be. I'm also 45, so I'm going through a kind of radical midlife crisis too, where you kind of realize like life is real, it doesn't last forever, and this is the choice that I made, the path that I've chosen to take, and what does that mean? I mean, I think too, like especially with magical practice, we tend to just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. And when I was kind of first starting out in this work publicly, I just didn't feel like magic was dangerous or that witchcraft was dangerous. I felt like it was only good and it was only healing. And if you did it wrong, then it just wouldn't work. And that would be that. But the deeper that I get into spiritual work, the more I realize that it is in fact entirely dangerous. The deeper that you get in, the more high stakes it becomes in terms of preserving your ego identity. I think that that's true in almost all mystical traditions, if not all mystical traditions. Maybe that's the definition of mysticism, is that there's like a dissolution of the ego.
Yeah.
And your understanding of who you are and what you want and what life means, or, you know, all of the Saturnine kind of shoulds, or the superego or whatever. Like, this is what you should do. This is who you are. Even this is who you are as a witch. This is what it means to be a witch.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the deeper that you go in, the more you realize that you don't know anything, you know?
Yeah.
The more, like, the deeper you go into space, the further you realize space goes. And so it just becomes more and more and more mysterious. And it becomes dangerous in the sense that a lot of the times the things that we initially think that we want are the things that we were given to want by our culture, by our family. Even, I think that we spoke about this in another place, about, you know, the idea of being successful in the arts, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Like, most people don't become artists thinking, I'm choosing what society tells me to choose, right? We think we're choosing the alternative path, the road less traveled. But even within that, there are ideas about what it means to be successful in that, or like what it's going to look like when we do it. And then I feel like the deeper that you get in, the more you realize, like, all of those things you thought or believed are not true, and they don't feel like you think that they're going to feel. And I think that that is something that I've really learned the more public my witchcraft has become, the more quote unquote successful I have become. It doesn't feel like you think it's going to feel. That's for sure.
Yes.
You know, like you really think it's going to feel a certain way. And when you look at other people, like, for instance, through the magic mirror of Instagram or whatever, where you see, you know, people with however many followers and however many likes, and we think, oh, they must feel a certain way. And I can tell you, they do not. They don't feel however they look, you know, like through that lens. So yeah, I guess I don't know. Who are you? Who are you in your work right now?
I think the only two identities that I feel resonates with me at the moment is being a mystic and being an artist. And to me, being a mystic is always having a question at heart, right? And realizing that maybe the point of my journey is the questions, or are the questions, right? That's kind of, like, I'm recently realizing, you know, having done quite a lot of my own personal work around finding ways to regulate myself, even though that is also a very maybe fake idea of like what is even regulating ourselves. But what I'm finding is that part of being alive that I enjoy the most is being surprised. And sometimes being surprised is pleasantly surprised, and other times not so pleasantly surprised. But ultimately, when I step back and look at the larger picture of things, I think they're always quite pleasant, because it shows you the truth that is always unfolding about who you are, right? Or why you're here. And then I think that the artist piece, to me, creation is wonderful, because again, it becomes a like evidence that you have been here. You know, something that you wrote in your essay about Mercury has to do with how little of writing, you know, advice talks about the body. And I think you spoke about transmutation magic being this idea of us bringing in this abstract concept into and through our physical body, and how that is its own form of magic. So I think that really resonates with me. If if you ask me that question about who I am today, I think those are the two things. And then the other things, you know, are just identities or tools or easy ways to communicate what I do with people. That doesn't always get to the heart. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I love that you can identify, that you can say artist and mystic. You know, those both seem very powerful to me and very true about you as well. Especially, you know, Pisces, right? Like, mystic's gotta be there. But,
Mystic's gotta be there.
mystic's gotta be there. That's what I like. I love a Pisces, man. There are not enough Pisces in this world. But yeah, I think I just my definitions of what things are, like even what art is or what mysticism is or what witchcraft is, are so sprawling, and my brain is so, you know, ADD that like quite clinically, I'm not just using that as a metaphor, that that for me writing is a way of creating a through line or a path between all these things that are kind of floating out like randomly in space. And it's a process of weaving things together. It's often really hard for me just to speak off the top of my head, because with writing I get to refine it and refine it and refine it. It makes me slow down my thought process, which I find really helpful. And in that part that you were speaking about of, you know, writing through the body and thinking of, you know, specifically Initiated was a memoir, so it was about things that have happened. It's about the past, but what you don't know about the past before you write a memoir is that it's all just this mishmash jumble. There is no narrative. There is no through line. And, you know, when you go back through and try and write a memoir and find this narrative through line that really doesn't exist, the body is one way that is something that can really help you. Can help you locate yourself in space. Can help you locate yourself in memory. And so I remember doing things like thinking about myself in certain situations in my life, or certain memories that I have of, like, let's say a breakup, or the time that I, you know, moved to a certain place, or the first time that I, you know, did sex work, which is like, you know, one of the things that the book is about. And thinking about, like, in that memory, what did the soles of my feet, like, what did they feel? Or like, what was the temperature of the room on my skin? Or what would I have tasted in this place? You know, what smell was there? Like, what did my organs feel like in that space? It's a way of really bringing things back to the body. And when we get kind of lost in the dark, I guess we could say that the body is almost like a thread, like Ariadne's thread, you know, that we can hold on to as we descend into the labyrinth of our memories and our thoughts and our feelings, and the kind of endless realms of imagination.
Yeah. I would love to hear a little bit more about your creative process and about how you write in general, and kind of what goes on behind the scenes when you're writing. There's something that you wrote that was just really popping at me. You wrote, "To write the book, I had to descend again into that labyrinth in search of the lost fragments of myself. But in retreading those grounds, I get lost again."
Yeah.
That's really powerful.
Yeah. Well, because as you know, like, when you're doing a creative act, you can do anything. I mean, when you write, anything could happen. You could literally say anything. And it's really about making choices, and it's about narrowing things down and cutting things away. And so you can go in and start writing about a certain, you know, memory from your childhood, for instance, or you could write about, you know, conversations that you had with your parents, or something like that. And then it sprawls out. It connects to all these other memories, all these other places, all these other meanings. You know, it connects to things that you've been thinking about your culture, things that maybe art historical references and things like that. And so my process is, recently the book that I'm working on now is about our relationship to the land as witches. And so I am writing about the place that I live and my relationship to that place and whether or not I know that place. And the interesting thing about places is that they are, Doreen Massey, who's a geographer, says that places are a simultaneity of stories so far, meaning that every single thing in a place has its own story and has its own history, and they're all coming together in this specific place. So the plants, the stones, your body, the beings that are living in your body, the beings, your friends, the people you're talking to, the dog that walks through, the butterfly that goes through, the wind started somewhere, is going somewhere else. And they're all meeting in this place. These stories are all meeting in this place. So how to choose the right story? Well, I make this map. So I right now I'm writing about the Arboretum. It's where all the trees live in Los Angeles, and so I'm writing about. I made this map of these different parts. There's a pond, and there's this grass, and there's this Tongva hut, and there's the Australian area, and then, for instance, I'm writing about the Australian area, and I'm writing about the eucalyptus trees, and the eucalyptus trees are all over California, and they're an invasive species. They were brought here by the boosters because they cut down all the Douglas fir trees to build houses for the settlers, and they thought they would be able to, because eucalyptus grow quickly, they thought they would be able to use them for building, but they can't. They grow crooked. So and they happen to be really fire hazardous, and they suck up all the water in the land. But I'm like walking through this Australian part of the Arboretum, and I'm connecting that to the eucalyptus trees that I grew up around, and then the idea of settler colonialism, and thinking about myself as a settler in this land who was kind of brought without my consent, but nevertheless here I am, and what do I do with that? So I am organizing all of it through the body, in the sense of where I walk. I literally drew a map and then kind of put all the ideas in different places. Right. And I'm trying to organize that now into a narrative. But the hard part is, with Initiated, because the ideas that I was trying to address were so complex, what I decided to do was to tell the story in the simplest way possible. Mm-hmm. I just thought, I'm going to start at the beginning and just right to the end. So I feel like it's a chronological story, and I just tried to write it in the simplest, most straightforward way possible. But that's because there was, time. I was born, and now I am 45, and, we just kind of go through. But, so now I'm trying to figure out how to have a narrative drive through this project when there isn't the same kind of story. And narrative is so helpful, like conflict, resolution, heroics. It just makes a story go. How do you push it forward without that? One of the things I felt was really successful about Initiated is that I do feel like there is a narrative drive that kind of compels you to move forward in the book. Mm-hmm. And I want this book to have that as well, but because it's about a plurality of stories, how do you do that? There's people that I really admire, like Margaret Atwood's book, The Blind Assassin. Did you ever read that?
I've never read that.
Well, it's just this masterpiece of interlocking narratives. And then my favorite book is A Chorus of Stones by Susan Griffin. Have you ever read that?
No.
Oh my God, you'll love this book. It's about the history of war told through like the family and geology and the history of ballistics and like nuclear warfare. And she just weaves it all together in this mind-blowing way. The first time I opened it and I just went in a few pages and it truly blew my mind. I couldn't believe that someone could so masterfully weave all of those things together. And also to write in such a way that you would want to turn the page.
Yeah.
You know, that you would feel compelled to find out what happens when all these different narratives come together. I mean, I admire that so much. And it's so challenging to do. I mean, you're a musician, so I've heard you speak so beautifully about musical compositions. I think, weren't you, there was one time where you were talking about
when we talked about music. Yeah, we talked about the sonata form.
Yeah.
Right?
And how there's like a format and you can follow it, but then you can also break it and play with it in that way. So that's...
Yeah. And you know, I think to bring it back to form, I feel like it is really interesting to think about how art is also necessarily, you know, when we think about art, often in astrology, we connect it to Venus, right? And I think that's absolutely true. And also there's something very Martian about the act of creating art, because you do have to condense it into form, right? And when you commit something to form, it does have to fit into a certain mold that then cuts away at all the other things that do not belong in that mold. It sounds like maybe you're also trying to find a through line in like a pluriverse or something like that.
Yeah. Because the interesting thing about narrative is the way that we as humans respond to it. So I think a lot of us feel like intellectually we appreciate the pluriverse, but then we finish books that have a really rigorous narrative. You know, we just want to. We just naturally want to. We're like, I have to find out what happens. You know, when you're watching a movie and it's a stupid movie, it's like a rom-com or something, but you're like, but I need to know. And it's just biological. It's neurological, right? Like your body feels compelled to know what happens. We just love stories like that. And interestingly, when you try and write a memoir, you know, you'll come up with these stories from your past where you're like, oh, I really want to talk about that one time that my friends and I went to the beach and, you know, so-and-so fell down that dune and oh my God, that meant so much to me that time. But it's totally irrelevant to the story that you're trying to tell. There are so many stories in your past that you think are so interesting that your editor is going to be like, why are you telling? Like, what does that have to do with anything? You're like, but that changed my life, that moment. But if it doesn't fit into the narrative, then it can't be in there. You have to be really ruthless with the things that you cut away, and they all have to kind of line up in a certain way. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like filmmakers try and tell stories of the pluriverse. And there's a reason why they're not like in popular cinemas, because it's really hard for us to follow that. I wonder if our brains will evolve to
be more accepting of that. Yeah.
I mean, maybe like Instagram is in fact the pluriverse.
And I would argue too, maybe that the podcast form is a bit of a pluriverse, right? And that's something that you've been doing for a while, and I think you do it so masterfully, and I wonder if there's anything there that links to this new project of yours, you know, in terms of and in a way, right? I guess maybe this is a stretch, but I feel this is connected to what we've been wanting to talk about being a sun in seventh house person.
Oh, yeah. I'm so excited to talk about that.
And being a person, you know, thinking about the sun, right, in our birth chart as that which we want to illuminate within ourselves and others, being placed in the house of relationships, right? The house of partnership, and also in traditional astrology, the house of enemies. And your life, in a way, and your life story to me really reflects that. And I'm totally speaking from what I'm perceiving from my end, right? Which could be a projection. But I see that, for example, that segment you did with Tucker Carlson was about the activation of, here is Amanda against an enemy.
Yeah.
And yet the way that you carry yourself through that experience became an initiation in and of itself, perhaps. And also you've really created this beautiful body of work with Between the Worlds that's documenting the ways that we connect with each other through conversations, right? Through like a plurality of views. Like I remember, remind me, is it Susan Schulman? Is that correct?
Sarah Schulman.
Sarah
yeah,
Schulman.
with like conflict is not abuse. Yeah.
Yes. And I remember listening to that episode, and there was almost like I could hear the friction as she was speaking, because you were like, wait, what? Wait, what? and it's so beautiful to watch that process, and I think you're just so fearless in sharing that process. I feel compelled to share with you that right before this conversation, I was listening to Krista Tippett speaking to Adrienne Marie Brown. And Adrienne Marie Brown was talking about Octavia Butler and about how in her novels, a lot of the story is about the protagonist being this person, right, usually a young girl, who knows with certainty that the apocalypse is coming, and therefore building relational qualities to prepare for the apocalypse, in a sense.
Right.
Because when all the systems have broken down, then all we have is each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that to me is like the sun in seventh house life. And I think that's something that you do so beautifully in a public way.
Well, thank you. And yeah, as I was preparing for that question, I came across this quote in this book called The Genius Zone by Gay Hendricks. I secretly am a little bit addicted to like pop psychology self-help books, but so in this book he says, committing gets the process started, but it's how you encounter the obstacles that inevitably arise that determines the success of your journey. The journey of transformation is really an ongoing process of encountering obstacles, getting thrown off track, and then recommitting, and then getting back on the path again. And it made me think of you in this question and this conversation that we've been having on an ongoing basis through DM about the seventh house and what it means to be a seventh house sun. And this idea of recommitment, to me, is really what it's about. That this intention to do something is commitment, and saying, I will do this thing, and then falling off, getting distracted, getting frustrated, moving away, getting pushed away, pushing others away, and then recommitting, and then saying yes again and again and again, and coming back to it over and over again. For me, that's so much what the seventh house is about. And I think I have Mercury, Mars, my Sun, Uranus in the North Node in the fifth house, in the seventh house in Scorpio, and then my South Node is in Taurus, and Jupiter is there as well in the first house. And so I think with my North Node in Scorpio, that I and in the seventh house, that I have a longing towards intimacy, that I have a longing towards relationship, a longing towards connection. And because of the culture that we're raised in, and also because of the family that I was raised in, I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to be intimate, how to be in a relationship, how to connect. But I think there's something very determined in both Scorpio and Taurus of like coming back again and again and again. And I also think the seventh house is the house of recommitment, partnership, but also re-partnership, recommitting to partnership, because that's in fact what partnership really is coming back again and again and again, despite the disturbances or despite being pulled away. And specifically with the North Node there, I think that it's about learning how to do that, like learning what intimacy means. And I think when I was younger, I knew that I really wanted it, and I knew that I really longed for that depth of connection, I think, as any Scorpio does, and perhaps any person does. But I didn't know that I couldn't allow that. Like I couldn't really allow myself to be fully intimate with people or to be fully seen by people. Like I didn't know that the ways in which I pushed people away, or the ways that I would choose people who couldn't, who wouldn't let me close to them.
Yeah.
As a way of, kind of as a preemptive. I think like when people choose to constantly commit themselves to people who are reluctant to enter partnership, then it's because they themselves find it hard to be close, and it's easier for them to stay in a state of longing than to actually experience what it is to be in connection with someone.
Yes.
And so I feel like my 7th house sun is here to teach me. I become a heliotrope towards that sun, a heliotrope being a plant that reaches towards the sun. And so I feel like my life is about turning towards that 7th house and growing towards it and recommitting myself to it every day.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if you feel also that 7th house sun is about recommitting to your relationship with the world. There was a conversation, I think a number of years ago, that you did with Pam Grossman in 2019 that and there was something you said there. I actually wrote it down word by word because it really moved me when I was listening to it. You said, "I see witches as priestesses of the anima mundi, of the spirit of the world. Our work right now is not really about ourselves. We're seeing ourselves within this larger system. We're asking how we can be of service in the system that supports us and sustains us at every meal, with every sip of water, with every bit of warmth that we have, which is all coming in this constant stream of gifts from the planet that we live on. And witchcraft is a way of offering something back to that world." And that to me is just so, like, that's a mic drop right there, Amanda. And also, like, are you a Taurus rising or what?
Right? For real. Yeah, I think of Taurus as Venus in the earth, right? Like growth, beauty, the just the luscious, delicious beauty of the earth. And I think of Scorpio as the healer and the one who's like willing to face the pain, like Mars in water, like willing to go to the depths and willing to see the things that other people are not willing to see. And I think of witchcraft as a process of walking between the worlds. And we've already talked about this a little bit, but we can understand the world as narratives, as stories, as pluralities, and willingness to walk between these worlds. And the way that we do that is through listening. And I think of Taurus especially very much as a musician, which is so much about listening, right? It's not just about making sounds, but it's also about listening to them, about feeling the rhythms and feeling the pulses, and being willing to listen to the stories, being willing to hear the stories specifically of the earth. And I feel like that's really what witchcraft is asking of us, is to have the courage to listen to the heart cry of the earth right now. And our whole civilization, or perhaps civilization in general, is organized towards disassociation. Disassociation from our bodies, disassociation from each other, disassociation certainly from the earth. And I see witchcraft as a process of reassociation or recommitment again to the body, and to the stories of the body and the stories of all the beings that make up our biosphere. Yeah. To that song, to listening to that song of all of those beings singing, coming together in this chorus. And I think that is what healing has to begin with. And I know that the word healing is been challenged a lot as something that is, I don't know, maybe colonialist in nature, or there are various arguments against it. But for me, I see healing as the creation of something new where everyone involved, every being involved participates and consents, like enthusiastically towards this new thing that is created. And so I feel like the healing of the earth is when all the beings of the earth come together and say yes towards the next step in the future. And in order for us to come together and say yes together and to give enthusiastic consent, we have to be able to hear that consent. We have to be able to hear that voice. And it's not that nature is mute. It's that nature is speaking constantly, or the world is speaking. All the beings of the earth, the stones, the wind, the plants, the fungi, they're all speaking, and we have to be willing to listen to them. We have to know how to listen to them. And crucially, I think at this moment, we have to be willing to face the incredible pain of listening, because sometimes it does really hurt. I have what is called borderland personality disorder, which is by Jerome Bernstein. Wrote this book called Living in the Borderlands, The Evolution of Consciousness and the Healing of Trauma. And in it, he talks about borderland personalities as contrasted with borderline personalities. Mm-hmm. And borderland personality is when you feel the cries of the earth as if they're happening to you, which they are. We're not separate from the earth. Right. But he talks about how people who have borderland personalities are walking between the worlds, the realms of the human and the animal realms, or the plant realms, or the elemental realms. And when those realms cry out, they feel it. And he gives this example of, he's a therapist, and he gives this example of one of his clients who was just talking about how she couldn't bear the suffering of the animals in the world. And she was telling this story about how she was driving down the freeway, and that in front of her there was a cow in a trailer, being transported probably to go, meet its doom. And she was thinking about the cow and the way it must feel being transported in this trailer. And the therapist said to her, well, what was it that you identified with about that? Like, what was it? How are you a cow that's trapped in a trailer, basically, is what they were saying. Mm-hmm. And she took off her shoe and banged it on the floor and was like, it's not me, it's the cows. It's the cows that I'm feeling the pain. And I resonated with that so much, because so often, when I feel like a lot of people in my life, particularly in my family, in the conservative sides of my family, think that I'm overreacting, or that I'm just hysterical about the destruction of the planet, or I freak out when they cut the plants down in their front yards or whatever. And they're like, what is it about you that feels like you are being cut down? Or what is it about you that makes you feel like that you're relating your own ego to the destruction of the earth? And I'm like, it's not about me. Yeah. I'm not sad because of me. I'm sad because of the beauty of all of this, that we also are. We're part of this. So yes, it's me, but it's the planet. I want to take off my shoe and bang it on the ground and say, it's not me, it's the cows. It's the planet. It's the water. It's the whales. It's the wind. It's all of this. And that soul gnawing terror and sadness and crisis is what I'm hearing. And I always too want to argue with all those folks out there who is like, oh, well, the earth will be all right. I'm like, no, it won't be all right. I mean, sure, yeah, maybe it'll evolve into something else, but that's like saying, well, Jewish people still exist, so therefore, the people in the Holocaust are all right. But it's like they're not all right. It's still not all right. It's not all right that happened.
Yeah.
And there are millions of people and animals and whole species, whole places on Earth that are collapsing and dying even as we speak. And for me, this is something that just living with this every day is just so beyond capacity, beyond understanding, beyond our ability, but beyond my body's ability to contain.
Yeah.
And so that I just feel like there's such a powerful call for witches to listen, to bear witness, to hear these songs, to sing them out. And I do feel like by singing them out together, by listening to them, that we can sing our way into the healing world that I was talking about, sing our way into like a world of mutual consent. I do believe that we can do it, but in order to do that, we have to be willing to hear. We have to be willing to see.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. The image that was coming to my mind as you were speaking was actually a chorus, and how in order to successfully sing together as a whole body of humans singing together in a chorus, right? You have to not just listen, but really attune to the people around you. Not just the people who are singing your part, but the people who are singing the other part, so that you can calibrate. And I think I was listening to one of your conversations with Brad Listy. Is that how you pronounce the name?
Yeah.
And he said something, maybe just in passing, about the individual being part of the collective and the collective being part of the individual.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that also brought me to what you were saying about the world, about how we have lost that attunement of how the world exists within us too.
Yeah,
like the
exactly.
cows are also you, right?
Yeah.
Because we are all one.
Yes, exactly. We are all one. And so when another being experiences pain, you are also experiencing it. And that is why I know that the agents of oppression are also profoundly suffering, because they are doing this to themselves.
Yeah.
This is a suicidal mission that they're on.
Mm-hmm.
If you cut down an old growth forest, you are destroying yourself. You are destroying this immense beauty within yourself, that we are the same. There's no separation between us. And I think that's really that Scorpio willingness to understand that, like, we live in this world where there's been so much suffering, and there continues to be, and yet there's also so much beauty and so much pleasure. I mean, so much beauty that is also beyond comprehension. And I think beauty and love, intimacy, are such intense sensations of, again, going back to that mystical dissolution of the ego, right?
Yeah.
That to see something that is truly beautiful, which we see every day. I'm looking out the window right now. There's an amazing sunset. The light's like coming through the leaves, and it's just, I mean, it could melt me all over the place. But, or also to see the beauty and the longing and the truth of another person.
Mm-hmm.
Your lover, your mother, your friend, your cat. to see the beauty and the truth of any other being is just so heartbreakingly beautiful, that we could be burned, we could be combust in its flames, in the flames of that sun of the other being. And so I think we also have developed all these techniques in order to not feel that intimacy. And well, I feel like part of my work right now is figuring, like, how can we make it safe? How can we create a system where we feel welcome and safe to do that with each other, to be in true connection and communion. How can we allow ourselves to be in true communion in a world that is hurting so much? And how can we allow ourselves to be in true communion and intimacy with a world that is so beautiful?
Yeah. I'm curious if an instance or an example or a moment comes to your mind when you felt that, like in your work.
When
you felt the possibility for connection. And us all, kind of letting go of our defenses.
That's what I really love about ritual. It's something I've really missed over these past few years of quarantine. I was doing a lot of public rituals like in person, and I still feel this, in the Zoom rituals that I do, which is really wonderful to be able to do it with people all across the world at the same time. But I really feel like it's in ritual that we really get to feel that. And that is how we create that safe space in that container. And in fact, I think that I'm sorry, can you hear that buzzing? I don't know what that is.
Oh, it's okay.
It's okay? Okay.
Yeah. I heard it, but it's very faint.
It's very faint. Okay. So I think that throughout history, the reason why we humans have done ritual is in order to create a structure that allows us to experience these very things, these ecstasies of sorrow and these ecstasies of joy that feel like too much, that they'll blow our circuits if we're just walking around in daily life, merging with the all like that. But in ritual, communal ritual, where we're singing together, where we're opening up the portholes, we're crossing the thresholds, where we exist in this liminal space where all worlds are open to us, and where spirits travel in from between the worlds, and spirits throughout time, our ancestral spirits and our heroes, and the spirits of the planets, the spirits of the deities, the spirits of the plants, the spirits of the elements come and speak to us in those times. I feel like that, and we give our strength to each other. We create these webs, these scaffolds that allow us to hold each other, to be safe, to be suspended above that abyss, and still be able to feel safe there in our connectedness. I think that that's really what ritual is for. That's why we do it, and that's when I feel it the most. I feel like I can feel it when I'm doing a public ritual and we call the spirits in, and everyone is there kind of calling them in these hushed voices, and then you can really feel them come. You can feel that I feel them come with the hairs rise on the back of my neck, and this energy like flickers down my arms into my hands, out my fingers. I feel like I'm being lifted up from behind my chest, kind of like held in the air, and I feel them come swirling around us, and it just feels so beautiful to be with them. And I always love, especially when you call the goddess, she comes. It's so beautiful that she does. But she does. Like, if you call her, she comes. If you hold the right space, she only comes where she's loved, honored, and adored. And if you set up a space to love, honor, and adore her, then she comes. And it, like the shine, the shine of the moon, the blackness of infinite space, like the rolling of the waves, the sound of the wind, like it all comes rushing in when you create that porthole, and it's so beautiful.
Oh, my heart just melts hearing you say that. I love that. Thank you, Amanda. There was a huge rabbit hole that I wanted to go down with you about astrology, because I feel like astrology for a long time, because when we think about the history of astrology, right, and the arc of how astrology has had to evolve in the West in order to preserve itself as an art, right, astrology's had to separate itself from magic in some ways. And I think for me, watching you and how you engage with astrology in your work feels like there's such a natural reintegration of the magical aspect of astrology back into astrology. Like when we think about being in relationship with, these celestial bodies, it's just so absolutely magical. And yet also the tradition has kind of strayed, right?
Mm.
And yeah, I don't know what's coming up for you when I bring that thread. And also in terms of really using astrology in support of, and perhaps even to amplify your work as a witch.
Yeah, this I feel like really gets to kind of the crux of what I'm trying to do right now with my work, which is, that my main concern in my work is really in staying in integrity with my practice. And just because of who I am and how I roll, like I'm not really a soundbite person, as probably everybody out there is listening right now is realizing. Like I'm not a soundbite person, and there's a lot of pressure for soundbites in our culture. And yet, the things that I'm interested in, for instance, with astrology, I don't feel like really lend themselves to like even like sound bites, Instagram graphics. I'm really interested in the Thomas More, who writes about Marsilio Ficino, who's a Renaissance astrologer, speaks of astrology as images. Like, and the image isn't what we think of as an image in our contemporary culture, which is like a kind of flat surface to project or to analyze aesthetically, but as a porthole to the well of consciousness. It is a portal to the collective consciousness, as like a pool that we can dive into. So if we imagine Saturn as a pool, as an image, and diving into the pool of Saturn, all of these things are collected in that pool. So Saturn is prisons and lonely spaces, and Saturn is wastelands and wandering through the desert wastelands. Saturn is stormy seascapes. Saturn is the boundary of the human realms and the entry to the God realm. Saturn is boundaries. Saturn is decay. Saturn is time. Saturn eats his children.
Yeah.
Saturn is lead. All these images that come together, that then when we say something like, I'm going through a Saturn transit right now, which I truly am, we probably all are in some way or another, but then I understand this time in my life as a walk through a deserted landscape where I can hear the howling of the wind. It's night, and the sound of the owl's wings like above my shoulder. I can, I can feel the thirst of it or the bitter cold of it, and yet I can see out into the infinite expanse of the universe. And understanding this time as an image like that, it just helps me. It helps me navigate my way. I think, and that is where the magic comes in, because to me, magic is a form of weaving where we connect through our intention. Like we weave again that pathway, we make these connections between things. So we understand, if I'm walking through this desert wasteland, then where am I going? What allies can I call in to help me as I'm here? Like,
Yeah.
What can warm me in this place? Who can come be by my side? Like, maybe I could call Mercury to my side, like winged messenger, wayfinder, road finder, pathfinder, crossroads keeper. Like, maybe he can guide me with his, he can raise his caduceus and call me to a new place, a new adventure, or that I can use. That I can make a plate of fruit and honey and milk and flowers and call in Venus to come add some life to this lifeless place that I'm in, or to call in company, to call in lovers, to call in a witness, to call in comfort with the moon, and sing my chants to Hecate Soteria, Hecate Savior, the goddess of the moon, and have her come in and guide me and escort me and help me feel less alone in the Saturnine wasteland, for instance.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I feel like these are the things that astrology offers us, and I feel like we really don't get those in the sound bites and the kind of predictive astrology of, like, this is how Mercury retrograde will affect your appliance, or don't sign this contract or whatever. Right. I feel like there's a place for that too, and for whoever finds that helpful, then great. But I just want to live in an enchanted world, and astrology helps me do that. It because in each of the planets, in each of the houses, in each of the signs, there are these portals to this richness, this poetry of experience.
Yeah.
I mean, is that how you see it?
Definitely. Actually, something that I like to say a lot is that astrology is a portal rather than a destination.
Yeah.
Because in this culture of soundbite, as you mentioned, it's so easy to be like, let's create a reel, for Saturn return. And I think there's a time and place for that, because that is often how people get into it. Right?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
But I think the more you live with it, the more you realize that astrology can be this invitation into an enchanted way of looking at the world, precisely because it speaks to reality in a poetic way.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I heard someone said the other day that poetry is so powerful and so healing because it never promised to be so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, the thing about poetry is that it was just, like, here's my little poem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how I feel about astrology, yes. And I think, what you were speaking to with regards to the image, I think has to do with how astrology is a symbolic language, and that symbol is something that unlocks different things. Like, when I say the word Saturn, unless someone is so bogged down in their mind with all these ideas and beliefs and projections about how unreal astrology is, what I have found is that even the sonic impact of the words themselves, of the names of the planet, impact people a certain way. And it's so hard to explain, because there's something so powerful that kind of moves through us. And I think it's almost like there is space because the meaning can never be fully set in stone.
Yes, exactly. Like, when we look at an artwork, an image, a painting, we can't say, well, this is what that means. Mm-hmm. Or we read Wuthering Heights, we can't be like, well, this is what that's about. It's bottomless. Art is bottomless. And so is the image. And so with astrology, I've recently been defining witchcraft as being the belief that the world is made of poetry, that the universe is made of poetry, and then acting on that belief. Mm-hmm. So taking action on that basis. And what I mean by the world is made of poetry is, yes, everything here has a story. and these stories are made of these images, these connections. It's not just images in a visual object or like a visual surface, but an image more like as a collection of places, spaces, ideas. So like there's a philosopher, Bruno Latour, who talks about the factish, like which he's combines with this idea of the fetish object, and how a fetish object is something that has all this meaning in the object, right? Like it speaks to the history of your ancestors. It speaks to the theologies of your people. It speaks to the wood where you got it. It speaks to the person who made it. It speaks to how it's functioning in the ritual. And he speaks of how the fetish object allows us to talk about things that we wouldn't be able to talk about without it. So it is in fact a porthole. It is a threshold. We cannot speak about the thing unless the fetish is there. And that is also true of Saturn. How do we speak of time and endings and finitude and boundaries and this desert landscape and being redirected on your path and this sense of enclosure and this sense of dedication and fortitude and stoicism, all of these things in one? How do we speak about that if we don't have Saturn? Well, we'll have to think of something else.
Yeah.
But that is what people who don't get astrology don't understand, is that they don't understand that we're using a poetic language.
Yes.
And the language of poetry is, in fact, an ontology that allows us to see and be in and exist in the world in a way that we cannot exist in the world unless we have this poetic ontology. This ontology allows us to experience an enchanted world. It creates the world of enchanted through our participation in it. And in our culture, which is so disenchanted, we have to qualify, and it has to make sense. We have to be able to measure it. We have to be able to say, well, this scientist said that this means something, and so in fact it's true because this Harvard study says that it's true. But how does a Harvard study tell us that a poem is true? How can a Harvard study speak to the history of our longing and love and fear and desire in a relationship, for instance? Like, it can't, but Venus can. Venus square Mars can. They're always, the gods are, the planets are often thought of as like the thrones of, or the temples of the deity, meaning that like in, historically, like in, archaic times, the god really is in the statue, right? And now we're like, how could anybody believe that a god is in a statue? It's just a bunch of stone. It's not the god. But it is and it isn't, right? Like, it's where it lives. It's the place where we can connect with it. It's the place where we can communicate it. It's not the only place that it is.
Yeah.
Right? Like, Zeus is not just in the temple of Zeus, or Jupiter isn't just living in the planet Jupiter, but that's one way to access. That's one of the doors that we can go through.
Yeah.
And it's just so fun.
It is.
to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because as you were speaking, what came to me was this idea that enchantment resists easy categorization, and enchantment resists control, right? And when we think about categorization, when we think about control, the spirit behind those studies you were talking about earlier is to categorize, is to control. And in that sense, that space is by definition devoid of enchantment if we think of enchantment as that which exists outside of control and outside of categories.
Well, yeah, because it's almost embarrassing, actually, considering the way that, like, the sort of rationalist, empiricist, we might say scientific worldview seeks to control and categorize the universe. And it makes it so that they can only see this one aspect of the universe. So in a like materialist worldview, for instance, or phenomenological worldview, then all that exists is matter. You know, like we could even argue maybe love is purely a result of you know, chemistry or biology. And yet what's like, but love does exist in the universe. Like the works of art do exist in like we have made poetry, countless books of poetry. We make paintings where we find all this meaning and we know that it's there and we talk about it. So how can we say that it doesn't exist in the universe? It's right there. It's right there in front of us. Like this enchanted worldview does exist. Like we are experiencing it all the time. But by looking for these ways of quantifying it and categorizing it, it's like putting blinders on so that we don't get overwhelmed by the fact that we live in this bottomless well of poetry. That is like maybe too scary for humans to allow ourselves to go into. I always think of the bottomless well of poetry as like the 12th house, right? Which is supposedly an evil house. It's a scary house because the people who were like writing about it were like, that is too scary to go in to this bottomless well where we can't categorize and we don't know the answer.
Yeah. Yes.
You know?
It's like what goes on inside that chrysalis, you know?
Yeah.
Of that dissolution of the caterpillar, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and if we can't find a way to make money off of it, if we can't find a way to exploit it for you know, purposes of, you know, capital gains, then we don't want to know about it, or it doesn't even exist. But I think you know, now they're saying that the intent of because capitalism requires new markets to expand into constantly, that the next field of exploitation is human consciousness. And in fact, we experience that all the time when we, you know, go on Instagram or whatever, that like our minds, our imaginations are being colonized, are being taken over, our attention, our experience, lived experience of the world is being colonized and literally profited from. In the sense that like the longer we spend on a social media, the more money that Instagram makes from advertisers or whatever. Exactly. But the realm of the imagination, because it's bottomless, cannot be capitalized upon. It cannot be corralled like any more than we could corral the universe. I mean, I'm sure we will truly try. I'm sure we will give it everything, like the Elon Musk of the world will really try to put it in a corral and hook it up to a battery, like the whole universe, if we can. But like, you're not going to be able to do it, guys.
Yeah, I always say, you know, I've been recently dipping my toes into helping people learn intuitive tools. And what I always say is that imagination is the vehicle that our self uses to connect with our spirit. That is
the vehicle our self uses. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yes, and it's literally how we get to that spirit experience. You know, the experience of the soul is through our imagination. Yeah.
Absolutely. The imagination is the portal to the spirit world. Sometimes when people, you know, when you do trance work with people, or people are, you know, baby witches and they're just starting out and they're doing trance and they are like, well, what if I'm just imagining this? But it's like, yeah, well, where'd that come from? Where'd your imagination come from?
Exactly.
Who put that there? Who put that image there? That you're going into the spirit world when you use your imagination. That is the door.
Yes.
Right? Like with your dreams, like, well, how'd that get there? And then you just can keep going. There's no end to it.
That is just amazing. Thank you, Amanda. I want to honor your time. So I have a couple more questions for you. The first one is, The name of this podcast is Healing the Spirit. So I'm curious to hear anything that comes up for you in terms of feelings, challenges, opportunities when you hear that word.
Well, I think it maybe goes back to what we were talking about earlier about healing being a collaboration with all beings kind of in a place to create something new based on like mutual enthusiastic consent.
Yeah.
And then I think of, in astrology anyway, I think of the spirit as the sun, right? Often sun, the solar is what we think of as spirit, whereas like the lunar maybe soul, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then if we think of healing the spirit, then I imagine all the suns, all of our suns, and all the suns and all the universe coming together collaboratively to create something new that is based on mutual enthusiastic consent. And maybe all the suns, the things towards which we turn that bring us light, that we illuminate, that we want to illuminate in others, as you so beautifully put it earlier in the episode, is what you're doing here. You're bringing together all the suns and the spirits of all your guests and the people who are on here to create this mutually consensual, mutually joyful, mutually pleasurable new reality.
I love that, Amanda. Thank you for being in this mutual, enthusiastic, consensual conversation with me.
I love it. It's my great pleasure. Truly, it is my great pleasure. You are just such a complete delight, and like you bring so much gentleness and goodness and curiosity and intelligence to this work, and we're so lucky to have you in this community. And thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this project.
Oh, such a joy. How can people find your work, Amanda?
Well, you can subscribe to my newsletter. You can go to www.oracleoflosangeles.com. You can buy my book, Initiated, basically anywhere that you can get books. And you can follow my podcast, Between the Worlds Podcast. And you can follow me on Instagram at Oracle of LA. And I'm trying to get a Mighty Networks coven off the ground, but I'm not the best administrator. So much work getting that like started. But then once it gets started, I'm so excited because I also offer often monthly rituals, and I just love the idea of building more community, more places where people can access spirit and the imagination and find this net that we mutually create together. So I hope people do join me. It's wonderful to make these new connections.
Yay. Thank you, Amanda. This has been such a joy. Thank you so much.
All mine.
All right. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Amanda Yates Garcia. I hope that you found something inspiring, something enchanting, perhaps even life-shifting from our conversation. As always, if you find yourself resonating with Amanda's voice, which you probably are if you're listening to this portion of the podcast, then I highly recommend that you check out all the ways to connect with Amanda. You can book sessions with her. You can listen to her podcast, Between the Worlds, that she produced with Carolyn Pennypacker-Riggs. And Amanda also does these incredible full moon rituals that are by donation. So I highly recommend that you check that out. It's so healing. It's so powerful. I've been to a couple of them. Highly recommend. If you found this podcast or this conversation to be nourishing, to be helpful in some ways, I would love it if you could subscribe, rate, or review this podcast with 5 stars or whatever is the highest ranking on your podcast app. If you think that someone else will benefit from this episode, please share with them too, whether that's on social media, with a friend, or with members of your community. All right, until next time, I hope you take good care of yourself, and I'm sending you so much love. Thank you for listening.